As we think about Thanksgiving, next week we have a special presentation to celebrate the 60th anniversary of LCR. I want to thank April Sharp for putting together a slideshow video. And we actually interviewed two of our oldest members who were here 60 years ago when we were meeting at Peterson Elementary School, when Huntington Beach was a wasteland of celery fields and bean farms, and Pastor Johnson was going door to door, knocking on the door saying, "Come to our church," and that's how it all started 60 years ago. And it's a wonderful legacy. And we were so close, and when we were doing a little video interview with the two of them this week, and they were just sitting there talking to each other, we were so close to identifying all of the ingredients to Lutheran wedding punch, which they used to make in room 3. And it was, and you all, if you've been in the Lutheran church, you've had this before. It's 7-Up and pineapples and a few, we couldn't, sherbet. If it's really fancy, you put sherbet in. But everyone who's been in the Lutheran church has had this punch at some time in history. But next week we'll have a cake, and I think both of them will be here. Mary Catherine and Peggy will both be here, and then you'll see that reflection as well. And to think about how we carry on the legacy of this work for the next 60 years. And this is just hopefully the beginning of the church's life here. And LCR is a very special place because there are things happening here that are not happening in other places. So if you talk to Michelle next week, they're taking a group of 15 people to this middle school youth gathering, which is middle school students and high school leaders. And when I first moved here 20 years ago, there were probably 300-400 kids at this. And this is the first time they've done it since COVID, and it's probably 25% of that now. Some churches just don't have youth programs, they don't have youth leaders, they don't have families, it's just a void. And so the fact that this is something you're investing in and contributing to is really important during this time. Also next week we'll have some guests from Japan. There's another school in Kumamoto that is asking us to host a day when they visit in March with their high school students. And so their principal will come next week. For the first time, never been to America. You're going to be his first impression. So you can decide what you want to do with that. You can make it memorable in more than one way if you want to do it that way. One of the interesting things about the Japanese mission, the Akune mission, is one of the ways Pastor Tatano is trying to renew the church is through art. So they'll go and have a concert. They'll do something beautiful. Like if you listen to that song that Amy sang, Lord, you're beautiful, Lord, you're merciful. The fact that God is called beautiful is very important because beauty moves us. It moves human beings. And so this idea that art can move people. Like if you're around this afternoon, you should go over to APA because they're doing Tartuffe, Molière's Tartuffe. And it's this wonderful French play from centuries ago about religious hypocrisy. So if you're feeling bad about Christianity, just go watch Molière skewer Christian hypocrisy, but in a very funny way. And we're actually doing a project with Amber Marquand over at Estancia, a similar project of art, communication. What is it that we want to say about the world, and how is it that we want to say it? And so those are some important things happening as well. I felt like there was one other thing I was going to tell you, but if it comes to me, I'll interrupt myself and bring it to your attention. It must not have been important, or it was really important, and everything's going to fall apart because I didn't tell you. But I know the one other thing I wanted to say, this is in addition to what I forgot, is hopefully you saw that there's a sheet out on the counter that has the LCR logo and a letter, and attached to that sheet is a form you can give your financial advisor if you'd like to donate stocks at the end of the year. This is a very important way you can support the ministry of the church and the mission of the church. For example, we had someone pledge 100 Amazon stocks to LCR, so that's about $20,000, at least for what it's trading at right now. And so this is a wonderful way that you can make an impact on the church, either for its long-term future, for its current mission, or for a particular project. And particularly as we look to buy the parsonage, that will be the case. When I was driving Peggy Sheldon, we were having lunch at an Italian restaurant in Los Alamitos after we saw Mary Catherine. And she said, you've been talking about buying this parsonage. She said, and you keep talking about how this will be for the new pastor, and you're not leaving, are you? I said, there's nowhere else I could go, I don't think. So I go, Peggy, we're stuck with each other. But this is for the long-term future. What we're doing is we're building the infrastructure to have a long-term future is what we're trying to accomplish. Well, one of the great anxieties in the Bible, and it goes back to the very beginning, is when everything falls apart through the introduction of sin, death, and separation from God. How is it that we're going to stay connected with God? Now, it's not that God isn't present, it's that God is hidden, meaning we don't see God in the way we saw God. We don't, and that hiddenness is a human response. It's a closing ourselves off. This is why Martin Luther loved to say that sin is curving in on yourself like an ingrown toenail. You just start to curve in on yourself and create pain. There was one of the great writers in the early church who said the problem with Adam and Eve isn't that they ate the fruit in the garden. The problem with Adam and Eve is when God approached them and met them, they lied to God and hid from God. If they had repented, if they'd said, God, this is what we did, there could have been a potential future, but they didn't. There was a cutting off, which is an interesting idea. I was up last Sunday afternoon at the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena, and there's a beautiful painting from Lucas Cranach, a great Reformation artist of Adam and Eve, if you want to reflect on that. And from that time, there is this sense of development of how God will be accessible, locatable, reliably present. And so really, in some ways, God is hidden from the world, and then we have all these different gods. People associate God and the divine with storms and water and trees and streams. It's this sort of enchanted view of reality. In fact, this is what I was going to say. Now I remember this Tuesday, I'll be speaking to the Catholic men's group from St. Simon and Jude at Four Sons Brewery. And we're going to be talking about this enchanted world that includes angels, demons, ghosts. How does the church talk about the spiritual realm? And I know some people have said, they said, what happens if I crash this and I'm not a man? I go, I don't know what the Catholics will do. I can't speak for the Catholics, But if it goes well, I can do it here. It'll be even better because I'll make it better. But if it doesn't go well, then you didn't miss anything. But it's this idea of sort of re-engaging the world and understanding our place in it. What does it mean to be a human being in this world that has so much stuff in it, seen and unseen? What does it mean to be a person of a porous nature, whereby we are spiritually affected by spiritual things, whether they be good or evil, meaning that we sort of take into ourselves those various energies of God, that's the Greek word, these energies of God that kind of can come and illuminate us and heat us with the fire of God's love, or they can become a kind of like infestation, sort of like termites, but in this case with demons and other little creatures. But these questions of what the human being's role is in the world after the fall is a source of great anxiety, because they say, what if we can't find God? When they're on Mount Sinai and God says, I will be your God, you will be my people, they're like, that sounds good. And then God goes, I want you to leave this mountain. And they go, well, if we leave, where are you going to be? How are we going to find you? We can't just keep walking back to this mountain. That's a long way. God goes, I will go with you. And God gives them the tabernacle. And the tabernacle, if you look at it, is topographically, like if you look at a topographic map, is topographically Mount Sinai. The same divisions on Mount Sinai are topographically divided in the flatness of the tabernacle in terms of who gets close to God and what it's like to see God's face and to listen to God's voice. And they have a very practical concern, which is, in a world that's been affected by death, and really even when we talk about sin, it's just a manifestation of humans not ending up in their right place. But these manifestations of death, this is God's attempt to be holy with an unholy people. So if you've ever read an Old Testament story where someone like touches the ark and they get zapped, or fire comes out and consumes them, sometimes people go, I don't know if I want to deal with this God. The point isn't that God's going to zap you or do fire. The point is, God is holy and humans aren't, and so there has to be some mediating presence so that we can be in the presence of the holy. Like if I gave you some spent uranium rods from a nuclear reactor and was just holding them and going, who wants to hold you? Go, oh my gosh, I don't want to touch these. They're radiating something that'll be dangerous to my nature. And this is the same thing with the holiness of God. And so the tabernacle turns into the temple, and the temple becomes that solid place where people say, hey, even though the world is confusing, even though there are competing claims on government and power, armies and influence, emperors and chariots and all that, this is God's house, and God can be found and God can be present. And in a world of change, in a world of uncertainty and competing political forces, we have the temple. Now, why did I give you all of this up to this point? Because the temple is the place where, as Steve just told us from the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is sitting with his disciples, and they were going, look at this place. Now, this will endure. And if you've been to Jerusalem, and you've seen the large stones that Herod put into the retaining wall that became the western wall of the temple platform, they're really impressive stones. If you've been to Egypt and you've seen the stones of the pyramids, very impressive. Now, because we think the people in the past were stupider than we are, we go, they couldn't have done that. And then we just assume aliens came, or so much television has been created, being like, how could stupid people do such smart things? And and 1,000 years from now, people will look back at us and go, how could stupid people do such great things? It's the same sort of prejudice of the living against the dead. But in this case, Jesus' disciples say this, look at these stones. Look at how big everything is, how solid it is, how reliable it is. And then Jesus says, none of this will be here soon. And if you go to Jerusalem, none of it's there anymore. All the stuff that's left is just the retaining wall of the platform that Herod built out when he extended the temple complex. Literally every stone was torn down. And the Romans did it intentionally. Within a generation of Jesus, they destroyed everything. And they built a pagan city on Jerusalem for hundreds of years until the time of the Christians with Emperor Constantine and all that. The Romans cut down every tree in an 11-mile circle around Jerusalem as they sieged the city. It was total desolation, total devastation. And then the disciples are listening to that going, that doesn't sound good. What are we going to do in a world where you can even take the house of God and tear it down and have nothing left? So there's so many questions they could ask. They could say, why is this happening? Who's going to do it? But really they want to know when. Like, is it going to happen while we're in town this weekend? Is it going to happen next weekend? Is it going to happen in my lifetime, my children's lifetime? How far are we talking, Jesus? And notice, as Jesus often does, he doesn't answer the question. He doesn't go, well, pull out your calendars and now circle this day in 70 when the temple is going to be destroyed. Interestingly enough, the two times the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, it was destroyed on the same day in history. The Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av. It's an interesting sort of symmetry of history and God's judgment, which is another conversation. But Jesus doesn't answer their question. He just talks about the birth pangs. He says, look, there's going to be war. There's going to be rumors of war. There's going to be violence. There's going to be all sorts of stuff, nation against nation, the ups and downs. He says these are just the beginning of the birth pangs. Jesus does not answer their question, but Jesus prepares them to be faithful people in a world that experiences great upheaval. Wars, rumors of wars, countries going against countries, fighting and violence. And I think it's an interesting question for the church, which is, will we be part of the pain, part of the inflicting of pain, or will we be part of the new birth? Meaning, what is it that we represent as we participate in this history? Excuse me, my wife was at the first service, and I said, I remember when she went into labor. You had like the Braxton Hicks, like the fake labor, but when the labor comes, the baby's coming one way or the other. Something is going to happen. Once the labor starts, this thing is coming. And this is what Jesus is trying to tell the disciples. It's already started. This kingdom that God is bringing through Christ is already coming. It's not like, well, we thought about doing it, and now God's on to another project. You know how God starts these projects and then gets distracted and starts another project over here. This is God starting something and completing it. And we will have a choice to be part of the pain or part of the new life that comes in terms of where we direct our activities, where we direct our presence, our resources, and our spiritual power. Now, this isn't new because the Babylonians destroyed the temple 500 years, 600 years before Jesus. If you have a little mental checklist of important dates in the Bible, 587 years before the time of Christ is when the Babylonians destroyed the temple. This is the first time with Solomon. Solomon creates the house of God. It's existing for hundreds of years, and then Nebuchadnezzar comes and just destroys everything. And that's why we have the book of Daniel that Steve read, because the book of Daniel is the consideration of where do we go from here when this place that was supposed to be God's accessibility, our place of connection, our place of reliably finding God, our place of God mediating to us holiness. What happens now that it's gone? And actually, not only is it gone, our king is gone, and our city is gone, and the best of us have been deported. It was the great deporting to Babylon of the upper crust so that they could keep an eye on those people who would resist the regime of Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel is part of that deportation that happens into Babylon. And if you know the story of Daniel, it is the struggle of people wondering if their God has been overcome by the gods of Babylon. There's a very simple calculus in the ancient world. If you win a war or you win a battle, it's because your God favored you. And if you lose, it's because whoever you were fighting, their God was stronger than your God. And so the book of Daniel is consumed with an anxiety. What if this is over? What if this doesn't have the same meaning and the same power? You may feel that way sometimes about your faith. You are confronted with something difficult, something hair-raising, something hard, something that shakes you at a fundamental level. And you go, you know what? All right, I did all this, but it doesn't touch what's happening to the crisis I'm in right now. And now we just need to jettison all this and just move forward, put our head down and see what happens. That's the book of Daniel. So you hear about Nebuchadnezzar, you hear about King Nabonidus, you hear about the Medes, the Persians, the Greeks, all the various manifestations where they go, oh, you thought the Babylonians were bad? Wait till you meet the Persians. And after the Persians, wait till you meet the Medes, and after the Medes, the Greeks, and after the Greeks, the Romans, then after it is this cascading scent of labor pains throughout history of different regimes, and in the book of Daniel, they are presented as monsters, various nightmarish creatures coming and shedding the blood and crushing the bones of innocent people. And Daniel's just looking at it all, going, okay, so what does this mean? Are we stuck in a cycle of endless political upheaval and empire over empire, just taking down the new kings so we can taking down the old kings so we can put in a new king? And thank God we got Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 12 is this emergence in the midst of this Babylonian anxiety where God says, let me tell you where this thing is going. Let me tell you what I'm doing. It is the first time in the Old Testament that you get the name of an angel. Up until this point, you never hear about angels. They talk about the angel of the Lord, but when it says Michael, the protector of the nation, it is the first time that we get a named angel. By the time we get to the birth of Jesus, we have Gabriel and this and that, and this is the emergence of this spiritual world that the Bible was not necessarily aware of. And then we get the promise of resurrection. It is the most complete and probably the first implicit or explicit telling of resurrection. So we get a new picture of the world, Michael and resurrection. And in this new picture of the world, this is what the Bible means by apocalypse. We're going to pull back the curtain, and if we pull back the curtain on reality, what are we going to see? We're going to see the power of resurrection. And when we get to the Gospel of Mark, when Jesus is talking about the temple being torn down, when we say, okay, then who or what will be the place where God's presence is reliably accessible, locatable, present to us? It will now be the face of Jesus. So you pull back the cloth, and there's the face of Jesus, the face of resurrection. This is the key testimony of the church, so that we can be about our holy work. This is why the last book of the Bible is called Revelation. Not Revelations. People oftentimes misquote it as a plural. It's revelation, a singular term meant to say in a world of monsters, upheaval, and nightmares, in a world of cataclysm, earthquakes, wars, and regime change, if you pull back the curtain and you say, what's really behind all this, you're going to see the face of Jesus, you're going to get the news of resurrection, because no matter what happens, it's all ending there. It's all going to be pointed there. It's all going to be redeemed there. We got a note on our church door this week from a homeless person complaining about another church in the community, saying that the pastors were faking Yelp reviews for the church, and he wanted us to be aware of it. And it turns out that I go, well, that's an unusual complaint. I've never had anyone say they're faking their Yelp reviews. But it's actually one of the other police chaplains. So I wrote him and said, hey, just so you know, someone's saying you're faking your Yelp reviews. And he goes, oh, I know. He goes, oh, I know who it is. He says, I said, well, it's just one more thing for Jesus to redeem. Just one more weird relationship or one more loose end or one more person who's just sort of strung out on the side. Just one more thing that Jesus is going to have to knit together and wrap together in this resurrection project. because God loves the world too much to leave it divided, to leave it broken, to leave it pulled apart, to leave it left to suspicion, gossip, and destruction, to leave it to the power of death, so that humans are like, where is God? God is hidden from us. We are on our own. All of these questions by which we are consumed, it is all ending at resurrection with the face of Jesus. And that's why it is so important that Amy read the verse that she read from the book of Hebrews. Because the book of Hebrews is this extended meditation on what it means that Jesus came amongst us as the priest, the high priest. Jesus comes and does his priestly ministry, not now just to deal with the problems of impurity, to deal with the problems of a holy God and an unholy people, but to take sin and death at its root, to break its power, and to make it possible for us to be a holy people in the presence of a holy God because of Christ. And you'll notice two things from what Amy read from the book of Hebrews, and I'm going to do them in reverse order because we oftentimes skip the second one. In reverse order, the writer of Hebrews says, do not neglect to meet. This is a very important part of Christian living. It is very important that you chose to be here on this Sunday morning. Do not neglect to meet. Do not neglect to be connected to each other. One of the most dangerous things that can happen in any society, free, civil, uncivil, and unfree, is that people are atomized. They're atomized, meaning they're individuals living parallel lives with each other, and they don't belong to anything, they don't belong to each other, they don't look out for each other. We had a meeting with a group of pastors this week because I was going to get a free lunch, so I said, well, I'll go to that. Some of the pastors, even a free lunch isn't enough, but in this case, and it was some pastors, someone from the city, someone from the police department, the homeless task force. And they were talking about the need to come up with new strategies for senior housing and family housing in the area of people who are either almost homeless or homeless. Like basically the county, and you won't hear this, but I'm going to tell you this, the county has told the city, there's no more money for families, so figure it out. And then people go, well, I thought that was your job. And they were like, as we just said, we're not giving you any money, figure it out. So that's where we're at. And I go, oh, well, this is going to be a hard question, so I'm ordering dessert too, because this is... But of course, one of the questions that comes up is, how do you find the people in need? Now we were talking about seniors. How do you find the people in need? What are the ways that you can uncover whether your neighbor needs you or not, because we're so separated from each other? And I said, actually, we came up with this, and actually Carolyn was part of this conversation too. I go, we came up with the perfect litmus test to help you discover if your neighbor needs your help or not. And they said, what is it? And I almost felt like I was revealing a trade secret, but I go, well, if they're going to do the work, this will be better. The secret is, can your neighbor take out their trash cans? Very simple. Is your neighbor able to take their trash cans out? Because we were talking to the trash company, and they were starting to get phone calls from people saying, can your driver please pull out my cans? I'm too infirm, I'm too sick, I'm too aged to do it myself. And the trash company goes, I'm sorry, but if we did that, we would never be able to pick up all the trash. But it's a very clear neighborly sign. Once a week, we all do the same thing. We all take our trash out. And if people are not physically able to do it, that is a very clear sign this person might need your help as a neighbor. A very simple way to connect. So when the book of Hebrews says, do not neglect to meet each other, this primary meeting in the faith is so important, but also meeting each other outside the church too, caring for each other's needs. This is going to be the thing I tell the Catholics on Tuesday, so if you don't come, you're going to get there's not going to be a mystical, we're going to talk about spiritual things, angels, demons, ghosts, but the result of it, what do we do in a world of spiritual realities? We show up at church. We hear the word of God proclaimed. We participate in the sacramental life of the church. God has already given us everything we need to be resistors of evil and to be participants in the good. God is you don't need anything new. You don't need to put on special clothes. You don't need to say special chants. You don't need to go off into some weird esoterica. God has already given you everything you need. Don't neglect to meet and spur each other on to love. Those are the two things that are said in Hebrews. Spur each other on to love and no neglect to meet. Now, there's a lot of ways we spur each other on. We spur each other on, if you were betting on the Mike Tyson fight, hopefully you didn't. But, or whatever, we spur each other on. You're watching this, are you doing that? Are you going to show up to this? Are you showing up to that? With an equal fervor, I hope that you will spur each other on to love. Are you going to take care of your neighbor this week? Are you going to find someone to connect with? Are you going to reconnect with someone in your family? And this sort of renewal that the Holy Spirit's talking about, it's one thing to do it outside your house, it's another thing to do it inside your house. Imagine what it's like to reconnect with the people closest to you, reconnect in your marriage, reconnect with your children, reconnect with your grandchildren, reconnect with the people who are your primary base, so that we can see the fullness of God's power in that place. So this is the work. And no matter if the temple falls down and all the stones are pulled down, the people of God will continue on our way, knowing that at the end of the journey is the face of Jesus and the power of resurrection. Amen.